Good morning, everyone. How's everyone feeling this morning? Good. Have you ever felt like you're on an island? Come on, we should all feel that way right now, right? A little bit. But you know what I mean. Have you ever felt like you're working alone? Like you're isolated? Like there's no one around to help when you feel like you need it? Do we have the clicker? Sorry.
Sorry?
The clicker?
Oh.
Thank you. I know that when I was a teacher, I felt that way really often. My universe was my classroom, right? The four walls were my island. But really, I wasn't on an island. I was in a community that had lots of assets, from universities to nonprofits, a lot of people who were there and who wanted to help me and to help my students. But I did not have the tools, I did not have the infrastructure of support there to reach out to those people, to those organizations, to seek help and to seek a much greater universe than the four walls of my classroom. And so today I'm going to use this island metaphor, since we're on an island. I'm going to use this island story, this island narrative, to talk about Remake Learning in Pittsburgh, which is a network that is designed to create that infrastructure to connect people across sometimes oceanic boundaries. I'm going to talk about learning together and how if we really want to create the change in terms of the fourth industrial revolution and a really dramatic change in teaching and learning, we need to do it together across organizations. So hello, my name is Sunanna T. I am director of Remake Learning. Again, a network that ignites engaging, relevant, and equitable learning in this time of profound technological and societal change. And I hail from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm very honored to be here with you all the way from there. It's a metropolitan area of about 2.5 million people and encompasses about 14,000 square kilometers. But before I talk to you about Remake Learning, before I talk to you about Pittsburgh, I want to talk to you a little bit about why we need to remake learning, why we need to do all of these things to change teaching and learning here in the 21st century. And to do that, I actually want to take you back in time. I want you to imagine yourself 100 years ago, right? It was a time of profound change. A few short decades brought us the internal combustion engine, the light bulb, the telephone, and more. It was a time when the nature of work was changing rapidly, right? People were moving from the farms and fields to the cities. They were suddenly able to manufacture things on a massive scale. Workers were pulling all-nighters on the assembly line, churning out cars and manufacturing steel. And it was a new kind of work, one that was based on repetition, right? Do this one thing one way over and over and over again. And this focus on repetition and efficiency got replicated in our schools. We asked children to learn English for an hour and then stop, learn biology for an hour and then stop, learn math for an hour and then stop, over and over and over again, and we got into this cycle of listen, memorize, test, repeat. Well, I'm here to tell you that we are in another period of profound change. Yes, what some are calling the fourth industrial revolution. This explosion of new technology is completely redefining and remaking what we think of our world, right? Computers are in millions of people's pockets. Robots are performing surgery. In Pittsburgh, self-driving cars are literally an everyday sight. And it's changing, too, what we ask of our learners, right? Tomorrow's graduates, by and large, will not be assembling cars. They're going to be designing the computers that drive them. They'll be tasked with tackling these huge challenges: climate change, food shortages, global inequalities. And they're going to be problems for which, unlike on the assembly line, there are no set standards. Learners are going to need to be collaborative, to work across cultures and across boundaries, to have creative problem solving, because these challenges are going to be too complex for them not to be prepared with those skills. And they'll need to do all of this despite widening inequalities, segregated schools, and a system that, despite so many educators' heroic efforts, is still leaving far too many students behind. As adults, it's our duty, it's our responsibility to do what Rona Walensky is talking about in this quote, right? Change the purpose of schooling. It's our duty to give every single child, pre-K through 12 and beyond, the tools and abilities to be successful citizens, to be successful humans in this modern world full of accelerating technology. As a former teacher, I taught first and second grade, I know firsthand that we are not just preparing students to enter the workforce, right? We're preparing them to be caring and compassionate and creative citizens. We're preparing for future communities that are more complex, but are also, again, more compassionate and more loving. And we are creating students that are going to create a more equitable world. And to do all of this, to accomplish this huge task in 2018 and beyond, we believed here in Pittsburgh, and we still believe in Pittsburgh, that we need a more expansive and more connected approach to learning. And so in 2007, we started bringing people together. To give you a little bit of a societal time point, remember, this was the year the iPhone came out. So we were really on a brink of a whole new set of technological transformation. And people just started coming together over coffee, really informal, fueled by breakfast, coffee, nothing too crazy. And they started talking about this time of profound change and what it meant for learning and education. Eventually, those breakfasts grew. Scientists, researchers, out-of-school educators, makers, technologists, all kinds of people from all kinds of organizations started joining in this conversation. And within a few years, these conversations really started to grow. And we realized that we needed something different, right? We realized that no one person, no one organization, no one leader could in any way do the transformation of teaching and learning on their own. That we needed to work with museums, we needed to work with libraries, we needed to work with out-of-school organizations, clubs, industry, government, philanthropy, and that all of these organizations and people actually needed each other as well. And we needed a way to work together. We needed, in other words, a network, an infrastructure of support to catalyze new ideas and to champion best practices and to communicate really great stories from all of these places. And that's what Remake Learning is, a cross-organizational network that helps support people in this time of profound change. And that's how Remake Learning came to be, and that's how it continues to thrive. So today, Remake Learning is a network of over 500 organizations just in the Pittsburgh region, so we're very regionally based. It includes startups, it includes nonprofits, as you can see, it includes museums, higher education institutions, governmental entities, and all of these people are continuously working together in really novel and interesting ways to accelerate the future of learning in the Pittsburgh region for every single student. The mission of Remake Learning is that we're a network that ignites engaging, relevant, equitable learning in a time of profound technological and societal change. By engaging, we mean that kids are building, they're making, they're creating, they're not passively consuming and regurgitating information. By relevant, we mean that learning is relevant to a kid's interests, their passion, their culture, their identity, their context, but also relevant to a rapidly changing 21st century economy. And by equitable, we mean that the learners that need the most resources and support get the most resources and support. And in our region, based on local and national research, that means we have a focus on learners in poverty, learners of color, girls in STEM, learners in rural areas, and learners with exceptionalities and disabilities. Now, this network that's been built over 11 years has gotten international recognition, from places like Forbes to CNN to the World Economic Forum. And we've been really excited to have that recognition, and we've also stayed really local in our region to make sure that we can deepen those networks that we have here. But I can tell you all about it all day, but the best way to really see it is through our network members. And so I'm going to show you a short video so you can get a sense of how this really feels in Pittsburgh.
When it's hands-on learning, it's something that you want to do.
How do we make Pittsburgh the very best place in the world for children? We're all about empowerment, but empowerment through technology innovation. We work with local service organizations and local students, parents, families, and adults in such a way that our technologies can be authentically useful in them improving their circumstances.
When I go back to school, I'll be able to apply what I've learned here into my classwork And when I do that, I'll be more prepared looking for a job after I graduate.
The learning and rehearsal of skills, whether it's arithmetic or literacy, becomes so central. What sometimes gets neglected is how do we help children grow on the inside?
It's really about pivoting the conversation from education to learning and harnessing all of the assets in a community to contribute to that overall learning journey a young person takes.
We need to learn a lot throughout our whole life. We should never stop learning.
So, as you can see, our network members include everyone from Carnegie Mellon University to the University of Pittsburgh, to the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, to schools in urban, rural, and suburban environments, to nonprofits that work with learners in our region, to all kinds of different organizations. And these organizations draw upon each other's strengths, and they interact in ways that they never may have without the Remake Learning Network in place. And they relate in ways that we hope are less transactional and more transformative, which hopefully you were able, transformational, which hopefully you were able to see in that video as well. Remake Learning is nothing without its network members. They are the ones that drive the innovation. They are the ones that are working with children in our region. And if you don't know Curtis Ogden, he does a lot of research on network theory. And he talks here about how thriving is linked to connection. And we really try and develop those connections in the Pittsburgh region, those human, face-to-face, in-person connections as much as possible. In this photo alone, actually, you'll see I'm actually hugging Marita Garrett. She is the mayor of Wilkinsburg, which is a small town in the Pittsburgh region. Next to her is Quincy Swatson, who runs an educational nonprofit, a STEM educational nonprofit in the region that works in schools. And off to the side there is Kenny Chen. He's the director of innovation for a startup incubator in the Pittsburgh region. So government, nonprofit, startup incubator, coming together in person to think about the future of learning, to talk, to work together, and to form interesting and novel partnerships. Thriving is linked to connection, is linked to deep human relationships. So we cannot be, do any of you recognize what this looks like? Your standard organizational model. Remake Learning cannot look like that. It cannot be islands, right, linked to each other in really hierarchical ways. Because information doesn't flow in novel and interesting ways that way, and we know that disruptive innovation comes from diversity, comes from people working together who never would have imagined working together before. And so we have a structure that looks like this. Our structure is very circular. Information flows from one place to another. There's not a hierarchical structure. Organic connections are formed, some intentional connections are formed, but information, knowledge, people flow very freely between all these different organizations, but we do have supports as a Remake Learning Network that helps connect people. I'm going to give you a really concrete example of how this framework comes into action. And it's via a program called Message from Me. So Message from Me was started when Carnegie Mellon University's Create Lab and our early childhood educator community called Trying Together came together to solve a problem. In the early childhood space, people were saying, man, kids, we are having a really hard time connecting with parents. When our students go home, parents do not know what they did at school. We're having a really hard time bringing those two communities together. What can we do? And at a Remake Learning convening, they met people from Carnegie Mellon University who said, maybe technology could help with this. We are an expert in technology. You're an expert in early childhood. Let's come together and solve this problem. And so Message from Me was founded, and you can see a student here using Message from Me. It's a one-way communications tool where students in early childhood have a really easy way to take photos of what they're doing in the classroom, send a one-way communication with audio to their parents, grandparents, caregivers at home. And then when they get home, their parents, caregivers, can ask them, hey, I saw you building blocks. Why were you doing that? What were you doing? What were you building? Hey, I saw you were painting a picture. What was that about? Where is it? Can I see it? And it created this amazing familial communication. Now, this solution, Message from Me, is literally in hundreds of early childcare and school classrooms throughout the Pittsburgh region. And it came from a partnership that two organizations that may have never met without the Remake Learning Network. So, how do we get, functionally though, from a community that has a lot of assets to a community that's truly connected and is creating these novel connections all of the time? We use what we like to call at Remake Learning the 5 C's. I'm going to go through each one of these in turn, but this is the work of Remake Learning. Remake Learning does not run programs for youth. We purely exist to be able to connect people together in really intentional ways to accelerate learning innovation, and we use what we call the 5 C's. The first one is communicate. So we source stories from all over the network. We pull them up into a collective platform, and then we disseminate that knowledge to continuously stir the pot all of the time through our digital platforms. So as our communications person often says, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what time of day it is, no matter what day it is, Remake Learning lives through its stories. And that's what our communications platform is designed to do. I encourage all of you to subscribe to our newsletter at remakelearning.org or follow Remake Learning on Twitter or Facebook at Remake Learning. You'll be able to see the kinds of stories that we tell, the kinds of information that we disseminate, the kinds of ways in which we're constantly telling the stories of different people in our network so that people can start to get connected digitally via our blog, social media, etc. The second C is convene. We bring two people together all of the time. And usually we bring people together to a common point, to a common network member place. And so we do that in large ways. This was actually an event back in May. We had hundreds of people come to see Ted Dintersmith speak. We hosted him back in May. And so we have a couple convenings a year that are hundreds of people. And then we have 2 to 3 a month that are smaller, between 20 and 50 people, where people come together on common topics of interest and are able to, again, talk across boundaries in person. That convening function has been part of Remake Learning since its inception, and it's still a really important part of the work that we do. The third C is catalyze. That means that we initiate mini-grant programs that spark innovation and partnership. They're both there to spark new ideas and to spark people to think differently, but they're also grounded in best practice and in what we've learned over the past 10 years, both locally and nationally, about how to redesign the learning experience for students. So over the past 11 years, there's been over $8 million in mini grants that have been given out in the Pittsburgh region. Most recently, the Great Remake, our most recent grant opportunity, closed in May, and we gave $400,000 to 66 grantees who are doing everything from arts to amplifying youth voice to project-based learning to virtual reality and augmented reality, all kinds of different projects and programs across, again, museums, libraries, out-of-school institutions, and more. Next, we champion. We shine big spotlights on our network members to the entire community so that parents, caregivers, people who are not at all involved in education can see the amazing things that our network members are doing to accelerate the future of learning. And the biggest thing that we do to champion is called Remake Learning Days. Remake Learning Days is for parents, it's for caregivers. They come out to their local museums, their local libraries, and they experience the future of learning themselves. Because you can tell people as much as you want that things need to change, but until they experience it, it's really hard to make that convincing. And so every May, for about 9 days, we have Remake Learning Days. There are over 250 events that happen in the Pittsburgh region over those 9 days. We get about 20 to 30,000 attendees across the region each year. Over 3 years, we've seen an 8% increase in adult familiarity with the concept of STEAM learning, and we've also seen an 11% increase in adult familiarity with Remake Learning. And so we know that parents, caregivers, families are really increasing their knowledge about what the future of learning looks and feels like in their own community. This is kind of a picture of what Remake Learning Days looks like, and this is actually just a small piece of the map of our region, but you can see how many events are happening in how many communities. We really want to make sure these events are equitably distributed so that no matter what neighborhood you live in, you have the opportunity to experience the future of learning in your own backyard. And actually, recently, we released a toolkit so that no matter where you are, across the country or across the world, if you wanted to host a Remake Learning Days type event, you could do it. RemakeLearningDays.org/AcrossAmerica is the toolkit, and is full of free and open source resources for anybody to use. And last, we coordinate. We bring people together with common interests to leverage resources, to reduce duplication, and to increase efficiency across our region. We currently have 5 what we call working groups in this coordination bucket, from everything from maker learning to computer science to our local STEAM ecosystem and more. And these groups really serve as interest area groups that bring people together for very specific goals. Often, these groups come up with projects that solve a problem, again, that no one of these organizations could solve on their own, but they're stronger together in being able to solve. So that's how you get from an island of your classroom to a networked community of support. Suddenly, your classroom doesn't feel so much like an island, it feels like it's part of a larger community. There are lots of supports that are built in to bring people together and to make sure that people are connecting across these boundaries. And you can do this too, because guess what? Every community has assets. Build on those assets, build on those strengths. Where are your industry partners? Where are your clubs? Where are your parks? How do you build upon all of the knowledge and information in your area? For instance, in Pittsburgh, we've had a long legacy of making things and reinventing ourselves, which is why we pulled on the assets of STEAM and Maker and really used that to drive the Remake Learning Network. Encourage cross-sector interaction and be intentional about it, right? Make sure that if you are bringing a group of people together, that you're intentional. Are there people from universities here? Are there people from schools? Are there people from out-of-school organizations? Being really intentional about that cross-sector collaboration will spark incredible partnerships that you never would have imagined. Equip educators to innovate. Professional development has been a key of Remake Learning from the beginning. How do we make sure that educators are working together across boundaries to solve problems? And how do we make sure we set up those opportunities in really equitable ways? Meet people where they are. So there are lots of people that are just starting out with 3D printers or laser cutters in a makerspace, and there are many people that are transforming entire districts at a time. But it's important for the network to meet people where they are, wherever they are, so people feel included and invited to the conversation, don't feel like they're not challenged, but also don't feel like they're overwhelmed. Be open and inclusive. So be open, for sure, welcome everyone, but open does not mean inclusive, right? You need to be both. Make sure that you're including different voices, that you're being intentional about it, and that everyone feels safe and welcome in every space that you host these types of conversations. Be audacious. Be really bold. Changing the future of learning, like we just heard about this morning, is not an easy task, and it's not something to be taken lightly. We need to be very bold and very excited and very ready to take on these large challenges. And so I encourage all of you to think big. Listen, memorize, test, repeat is failing far too many learners. And it's now time to make a big change. And I'm going to leave you with this idea that, yes, sometimes we feel like we're on an island. But guess what? Islands are not floating in a body of water, right? They're connected to each other, and they're connected to every landmass way down in the bottom of the ocean, way down in places where we can't always see or can't always identify. We're all actually connected. And so while we need to build boats, while we need to build communication strategies, while we need to build that infrastructure to make sure that we're continuously connected, the reason why that works is because we are all going towards the same goal. We all care about learners, right? We all want learners to succeed in this modern world and this modern society. And so as long as we keep learners at the center of our conversations, as long as we listen to them and trust them and love them and keep them in the middle of every conversation that we have, we'll be able to make these connections a little more easily. As Fred Rogers, a Pittsburgh native and creator of the iconic children's television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, said, "One of the greatest dignities of humankind is that each successive generation is invested in the welfare of each new generation." So I encourage you, as you go through your sessions today and tomorrow, to think about learners, think about this next generation, and think about how connecting across your organizational boundaries is going to accelerate this really incredible change that we're asking for educators and for students. So If you're ready to strengthen or start a network where you live, we're here to help is the good news. We have the Remake Learning Playbook, which outlines the 5 C's. It's completely free. It's available on the website, but we'll also send you a free copy if you want one. That's at remakelearning.org/playbook. We also have this Remake Learning Days toolkit at remakelearningdays.org/across America, across the world. Who knows? I would love that. All open source, all free, all here for you to be helpful. So if you want more information about either of those, come find me after the keynote, and I'm happy to give you more information. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for putting in the time to invest in this next generation of learners. And thank you. I'm wishing you a wonderful conference and a wonderful day. Thank you so much.